Today I will talk about the building of the temple that's the birthplace of Lord Ram in Ayodhya, or rather, that is being projected as the birthplace of Lord Ram in Ayodhya. Lord Ram is a figure from the Hindu epic Ramayana, and I will talk about the ways in which the projection of the building of the temple are tied to questions of hate, violence, and the deployment of communication. On August 5, in the morning in India, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, will celebrate through a program that will be broadcast across the globe the foundation of this temple. This event is being celebrated across the globe, and particularly of attention in the global coverage of this event is the projection of the three-dimensional image of the Ayodhya temple model on the Times Square. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, this event is being celebrated by various Hindu groups as the beginning of the building of a temple to celebrate Lord Ram and really celebrating his birthplace. What I will talk about in this talk is this celebratory talk of building the temple, which is projected in democracies and particularly in Western democracies across the globe as a site of religious multiculturalism, actually writes over some of the darkest elements of contemporary Indian history. The site where the temple, the Ayodhya temple, is going to be built is the site where a mosque used to sit, the Babri masjid. What you have in front here is an image of the footworkers of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad or the VHP, other Hindutva organizations, of which also the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the ruling party, is a part of, are breaking down the mosque. This is an image from 1992. I was an undergraduate student at that point, and this image haunts my memory even today as we think about the ways in which the violence that was carried out on this mosque were orchestrated. Up until this point in 1992, the right wing Hindutva elements in India, the fringe religious elements of India, had limited parliamentary presence. They only had about 2 seats in the Indian parliament. But the organizing of the forces around this mosque and the projection of this mosque as the site where Lord Ram was born worked to catalyze a nation and really build support for these fringe elements, helping mainstream them, and also, of course, mainstreaming a politics of violence and hate, and catalyzing masses from across India in what was organized as a Ratha Yatra, a chariot procession led by the leader L.K. Advani of the BJP. And the procession culminated in the procession workers, the Kar Sevaks, the people that were donating their time and energy um, coming into the site and then attacking the mosque and starting to bring it down. Now, working up until this point is the systematic use of communication by the Hindutva forces in India to project a particular narrative, which is the narrative of this mosque, the Babri Masjid, being the original site of the birth of Lord Ram, and then that space or that temple that used to exist there actually being destroyed by the Muslim invaders. So you have the active production of the other. In this case, it is the other being the Muslim invader, which has been part of the Hindutva narrative and part of its arrival into hegemony, the projection of the Muslim other, which is work to organize the nation and the Hindus in the nation around the politics of the BJP. Work of dismantling this mosque then is set up as one of taking back India's history, which is, of course, its Hindutva history. Of course, what is important to remember in this narrative is that much of this narrative construction is based upon a series of works of fiction, a series of elements of communicative constructions that are tied to the establishment of this place as the birthplace of Lord Ram. And one of those elements that is involved here is the bringing in of initially an image of Lord Ram and setting it up within the mosque, which then becomes the site of politics, of pointing to the existence of the temple and then organizing the forces of hate around it in order to bring down the mosque. This particular act of bringing down this particular mosque is then tied to a grand narrative that is constructed by the BJP, which is the grand narrative of the Muslim other and the Muslim invader, against which then the BJP sets up its political mission of setting up a Hindu state for the Hindus and as a corrective to the secular history of India, which is projected as false or a myth, and as a corrective to what is projected as a history of Islamic invasions and destructions of Hindu sites of worship. Most of it, however, based upon archival evidence and based upon historical evidence, is fiction. A large part of it is the work of narrative production, which is why communication here is really important. It is through communication that this hate is materialized, as you see in this particular image. And as the mosque is destroyed, that then becomes the basis for the establishment of Hindu hegemony, as evident in the setting up of the temple in the birthplace of Lord Ram. Now, as with any epic, of course, there are multiple constructions regarding the birthplace of Lord Ram. And in a pluralistic context, what is beautiful about these constructions is that one will hear multiple historico-cultural claims to where Lord Ram was born, and that is part of religious myth making and religious rooting. But of course, what is integral to the agenda of the BJP and these right wing political forces is the assertion of a monolithic history, is the setting up to hegemony of a monolithic narrative that then serves the Hindutva agenda. So, at the heart of all of this is communicative inversion, the deployment of communication to turn materiality on its head. Communicative inversion is also tied to erasure. So, the history of the Babri Masjid, for instance, is erased in order to set up this narrative of this being the birthplace of Lord Ram. And then fast forward to 2020, we are in a space of celebrating across the globe, across global communities, this foundation laying of the temple that was the birthplace of Lord Ram, disconnected from this history of the violence and disconnected from the story of the mosque that existed there. So, Hindutva, as it has been mainstreamed, remember, as I said to you, that the BJP in 1992 used to have two parliamentary seats. From there to its hegemonic position today, that transformation has been catalyzed by this particular moment. Um, uh, and that moment also has been enabled by the Indian National Congress, by the leadership of Rajiv Gandhi, that allowed this agenda and this narrative to actually take root, um, and that allowed the first breaking into the mosque to set up the temple. So, symbolic resources have historically been deployed, but as they have achieved hegemonic proportions, they have erased entirely the narrative of the mosque, and more fundamentally, the narrative of the violence that is integral to the destruction of the mosque and to setting this up as the temple for uh, memorializing, for recognizing the birth of Lord Ram. So here you also see the interplay of the discursive and the material. The discursive is deployed in order to establish the materiality of violence. And at the same time, the materiality of violence is systematically erased under a narrative of multiculturalism and religious pluralism to turn to the story being a celebratory story. So that the imaginative resource for articulating the nation has turned into an imaginative resource for articulating a Hindu nation that rightfully belongs to Hindus, and that is a corrective to what is projected as centuries of Islamic oppression and violence. So, the image of the Hindu nation in that sense is a fascist image, is an image that actually works to erase its Muslims. It is an image that actually works to attack its Muslims. It is an image that actually works to legitimize the violence on its Muslims and at the same time erase the narrative anchors of this violence. So, within the context of the global flows of this image, then, the celebration of the foundation of that Ram temple in Ayodhya at Times Square, that is projected as a story of global celebration of the arrival of multiculturalism and Hindu multiculturalism, actually speaks to a fairly disturbing narrative. And that narrative is one of the legitimization of the violence of the Hindu right and the legitimization of this violence through diaspora, through Indians living abroad in various liberal Western democracies and harboring deep Islamophobic sentiments. Those deep Islamophobic sentiments, however, are whitewashed by the story of the celebration of Hindu multiculturalism, religious pluralism. What actually, when you dig deeper, you realize is that this is anything but religious pluralism. This actually is a celebration of Islamophobia. This is actually a celebration of violence that has been carried out on Muslims. What is also worth pointing to is that the funding sources for this kind of violence often emerge from the diaspora. So the BJP, for instance, the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is the non-profit organization that is sister to the BJP, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad or the VHP, those organizations draw substantive funding from Indians in the diaspora. And in that sense, one would argue that large proportions of Indians in the diaspora support this politics of hate and support this Islamophobia. This, in that sense, is enabled by liberal multicultural politics in Western democracies that are complicit in the production of these spaces of hate by legitimizing them as multiculturalism. So, what I talk about in my work as diaspora extremism, the kind of religious extremism you see in the diaspora, the Islamophobia that you see in the Indian diaspora, are tied to the broader politics of multiculturalism. So, multiculturalism in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that talks about creating celebratory spaces for different faiths. Unfortunately, within this context, ends up supporting Islamophobia when it allows these right wing diaspora elements, these Islamophobic diaspora elements, to celebrate this particular moment of destruction and violence. So, coming back to the contemporary context of Islamophobia in New Zealand, when we think about the Christchurch terror attack and consider the Islamophobic roots of that terror attack, it is important that we see that Islamophobia in relationship to this Islamophobia. We cannot separate the two from one another. If we really want to build a New Zealand that is inclusive, that is open to Muslims, that is open to multiple religious faiths, we have to critically interrogate the ways in which Islamophobia is mainstreamed, the ways in which Islamophobia is normalized, and ironically, the ways in which Islamophobia is projected as multiculturalism. In the US today, there are a number of protests that are scheduled to take place on August 5th to draw attention to the fascism and to the forces of neo fascism that underlie the celebration of the foundation laying of the building. And similarly, I think that we need various forms of resistance, various forms of resistance across the globe. We need to build and push for a variety of narrative accounts that demonstrate our global commitments to fighting this Islamophobia and truly building pluralist infrastructures. And that also means that we have to constantly deconstruct the uncritical celebratory religious multiculturalism that allows this kind of Islamophobia to circulate. We also have to build counter narratives that challenge and disrupt the communicative inversions that are carried out by the Hindutva forces. We have to remind consistently that this actually is the site, for instance, where the Babri masjid used to exist, and that was brought down through violence, and that has then been legitimized through the court processes that are now in the control of the Hindutva forces since the arrival of the Hindutva political party as the mainstream party that has occupied the national discourse. We also have to build narrative infrastructures that consistently tell other kinds of narratives, voice infrastructures for the voices of Muslims as they offer their accounts of lived experiences for what happened in 1992. There were a series of riots that took place across the country in India. Those need to be foregrounded, as well as the experiences of Muslims as they experience these forces of Hindutva today. In the work of CARE, for instance, we have documented through our fieldwork over the last year and a half the experiences of marginalization and disenfranchisement felt by Muslims in India today that have significant impacts on their health and well being. And I think those narrative infrastructures need to be articulated and foregrounded. We also need to build and sustain infrastructures of protest, such as the one you see here, such as the infrastructures of protests you see across Aotearoa, New Zealand, within the context of the neo-fascist citizenship policies that are designed to marginalize and disenfranchise large numbers of India's Muslims. And then, really thinking about how do we build solidarities across communities within spaces, but also across spaces in order to sustain our ongoing challenge to these forces of fascism. So I want to wrap up by inviting you to consider the material effects of these discursive constructions of the foundation laying of the Ram temple in Ayodhya, and particularly the material effects in terms of what is being erased, what has been erased, and what has been destroyed, and what are the effects of these erasures and destructions on religious minorities in India, but also on Indian religious minorities, Muslim minorities specifically, that live in other parts of the globe. And from this, hopefully, we build a register for conversations on pluralism, but also build registers for challenging our own states, our politicians, to ensure that they work toward challenging structures of hate, toward dismantling structures of hate, and truly commit to building pluralist societies. Thank you.